What if one of humanity's oldest written languages contained a message about human origins that we were never supposed to understand? Ancient Sumerian texts have survived for thousands of years, but now AI is being used to translate and analyze their mysterious passages. And some interpretations appear to describe different groups of humans, strange beings, and knowledge far beyond what we might expect from the ancient world. But what does the evidence actually say? And how much of this is genuine translation? And how much is modern speculation? In this video, we're going back to the original text to find out. Somewhere in a museum storeroom, sealed in clay for over 4,000 years, sits a story that most people have never heard. A group of gods arguing over whether humanity deserved to exist at all, one of them deciding to wipe us out entirely, and another one secretly working behind his back to save us. This isn't a movie pitch. It's one of the oldest written stories on Earth, pressed into wet clay by Sumerian scribes long before the Bible, long before Greek mythology, long before most of what we consider ancient history had even begun. And once you know it, you start noticing its fingerprints everywhere. The Sumerians lived in what is now southern Iraq, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and they are generally credited with building the first true cities and inventing the first known system of writing, called cuneiform, wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay with a reed stylus. For more than a century, archaeologists have been digging up their tablets by the thousands, from the ruins of cities like Uruk, Nippur, and Ur. Many of these tablets are damaged, some are duplicates copied by later scribes, and translating cuneiform has always been slow, painstaking work, because a single symbol can shift meaning depending on context, and huge portions of many tablets are simply missing, chipped away by time. Scholars have been piecing this puzzle together since the 19th century. And while artificial intelligence tools are now helping researchers speed up transcription and compare fragments faster than ever before, it's important to say clearly, this is a real, ongoing academic field, built by generations of human Sumerologists, not a single dramatic reveal. What follows isn't a secret that was just uncovered. It's a genuinely strange and often overlooked story that has been sitting in plain sight in translated text for decades. And it deserves way more attention than it gets. The core of the story comes from a text scholars call the Atrahasis epic, along with related tablets like the Enuma Elish and the Sumerian king list. According to these myths, in the earliest age of the world, the gods themselves did all the labor. They dug the rivers, worked the fields, and maintained the world's infrastructure. And after a very long time, they got tired of it. The lower-ranking gods, the ones stuck doing the physical work, eventually revolted, laying down their tools and surrounding the house of Enlil, the god associated with air, storms, and command, demanding an end to their burden. Rather than punish them, the senior gods decided on a different solution. They would create a new being to take over the labor entirely. That being was humanity. The god given the task of actually designing this new creature was Enki, sometimes called Ea in later Babylonian versions, the god associated with water, wisdom, and crafting. According to the myth, Enki worked with a birth goddess, sometimes called Ninhursag or Mami, to mix clay with the blood of a slain god, giving the new creation both an earthly body and a spark of divine essence. The text describes this almost like a technical process, careful measurements, ritual formulas, something built rather than simply spoken into being. The result was humanity, a species strong enough to farm, dig canals, and build cities, but mortal, so it would never challenge the gods themselves. For a while in the story, this arrangement worked exactly as planned. Humans multiplied, took over the labor, and the gods rested. But then a problem emerged, one that feels strikingly modern for a 4,000-year-old text. Humans multiplied too fast. Cities grew loud and crowded. Enlil, described in these texts as the most powerful and most easily irritated of the gods, complained that he couldn't sleep because of the constant noise of human civilization below. His response, according to the Atrahasis epic, was escalating and disturbing. First, he sent a plague to thin the population. When humans survived that and kept growing, he sent a drought and a famine. Each time, the same god who had helped create humanity, Enki, quietly intervened, giving hints to a wise and pious man to counteract the disaster and keep humanity alive. This cycle repeats itself several times in the text, almost like a divine game of chess between one God trying to preserve his creation and another trying to erase it. Eventually, Enlil ran out of patience entirely. According to the Atrahasis text and echoed in the later, more famous Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, he convinced the Council of Gods to send a flood that would destroy humanity completely. And this time he made the other gods swear an oath of secrecy, so no one could warn the humans in advance. But Enki found a loophole. Bound by his oath not to speak to any human directly, the tablets describe him instead speaking to the reed wall of a house, knowing that a man named Atrahasis, whose name literally means exceedingly wise, was on the other side listening. Through that wall, Enki gave Atrahasis instructions: tear down his house, build a boat, seal it with pitch, and bring his family and animals aboard. It's the same core structure that shows up centuries later in the Hebrew story of Noah, and in a related version from the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the flood survivor is named Utnapishtim. Most scholars today agree these aren't three unrelated coincidences, but versions of the same much older Mesopotamian flood tradition, adapted and passed down across different cultures and centuries. What's genuinely fascinating and rarely gets enough attention is what happens after the flood in these texts. When the flood finally recedes and Atrahasis's boat comes to rest, the surviving gods gather and there's an argument. Enlil is furious, accusing Enki of betraying the secrecy oath. But other gods, including the mother goddess who helped originally create humanity, push back, essentially arguing that wiping out an entire species was excessive and wrong regardless of the noise complaint that started it. The gods ultimately reach a kind of uneasy compromise. Humanity would be allowed to continue, but with limits built in this time, a fixed lifespan, and among later Babylonian variations, categories of people who would never bear children, so that population growth would be naturally checked going forward, without needing another flood. It's less a triumphant ending, and more a negotiated settlement. Gods on both sides adjusting the rules of existence to avoid repeating the same conflict. There's a separate but related figure worth knowing about too. Adapa, sometimes described in later tradition as a wise man created by Enki and given extraordinary intelligence, said to be the first of a line of sages who taught humanity the arts of civilization, farming, writing, building. In the myth of Adapa, he's summoned before the sky god Anu after accidentally offending him, and Enki warns him beforehand not to eat or drink anything he's offered while there, fearing it will be poison. When Adapa arrives, though, what he's actually offered is the bread and water of immortality, and following Enki's warning, he refuses it, unknowingly giving up the chance for humanity to become undying. Scholars have debated for a long time whether this was Enki protecting Adapa from a real threat or a mistake, or even a deliberate choice by Enki to keep humanity mortal and therefore dependent on the gods. The text itself is ambiguous, and that ambiguity is part of what makes it such an enduring puzzle, rather than a story with an easy villain and hero. It's worth pausing here to be clear about something, because these myths get twisted online in ways that go far beyond what the actual texts say. None of these tablets describe different groups of people being engineered with different worth, different intelligence, or different rights based on physical traits, and treating ancient myths that way isn't scholarship, it's projection. What the texts do describe is far more interesting on its own terms. An origin story about labor, mortality, divine conflict, and the tension between control and mercy, told by a civilization trying to make sense of famine, flood, disease, and why humans exist and suffer at all. Reading it as an allegory for the harsh, unpredictable world the Sumerians actually lived in, floods that really did periodically devastate Mesopotamia, droughts, disease, overcrowded early cities, tells you far more about how ancient people processed real hardship than any claim about secret hidden history ever could. This story also matters because of how much it quietly shaped everything that came after it. Elements of the Atrahasis flood story appear almost point for point in the much later Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, written centuries afterward, and from there, many scholars believe, echoes of this Mesopotamian flood tradition filtered into the Hebrew Bible's account of Noah, written later still. The same region that gave us the wheel, the first system of writing, and the base 60 number system we still use for telling time gave us one of the oldest surviving templates for a flood narrative that would go on to appear in various forms in cultures across the ancient Near East. Whether that reflects a shared memory of a real regional flood event, independent invention, or centuries of cultural transmission along trade routes is still debated by historians, and honestly, that unresolved debate is more compelling than any manufactured mystery could be. None of this requires ancient astronauts, secret AI decryptions, or a hidden master plan to be worth telling. The Sumerians were not primitive people scratching out simple fables. They were the architects of the first cities, the first codified laws, the first system of writing complex enough to record poetry, contracts, and astronomy, and their mythology reflects a civilization already wrestling with enormous questions. Why do good people suffer? Why is the world unpredictable? What do we owe the forces more powerful than ourselves? And what happens when those forces disagree about our fate? Enki and Enlil aren't stand-ins for aliens or secret races. There's something more universally human than that. Two different ideas about power itself, one that punishes and one that protects, arguing it out across the oldest story we have. What makes this material worth revisiting today isn't a shocking new discovery. It's that most people have simply never been told the full story, because it rarely gets taught outside of specialized university courses, and pop culture tends to flatten it into vague talk of ancient astronaut gods, without ever actually reading what the tablets say. The real texts are stranger, messier, and more emotionally complicated than that flattened version, full of gods who argue, break promises, show mercy, and change their minds. Somewhere in a museum in London, Philadelphia, or Baghdad, there are still tablets sitting in storage, fragments not yet fully translated, waiting for the next scholar, human or AI-assisted, to fill in a missing line. And every time one of those gaps gets filled, we get a little closer to understanding not some hidden secret about who we are, but a genuinely honest window into how the very first civilization tried to make sense of being alive.